In April 2005, the Longbridge factory in Birmingham, England went silent. The production line stopped. 6,000 workers walked out, not knowing if they'd ever walk back in, and 100 years of British automotive history ended with a name that once meant something, now meaning nothing at all. If you've never driven a Rover, you might not understand why this matters. But if you grew up in Britain, you know. You know about the wood and leather interiors, the quiet confidence of a Rover saloon, the sense that this was a car built by people who took pride in making something dependable rather than flashy. This isn't just a story about bankruptcy. It's about what happens when an industry gets passed from owner to owner, each one promising salvation and each one failing to deliver it. This is the downfall of Rover. Longbridge stands empty, the echo of machinery replaced by a heavy, unfamiliar silence. The gates that once welcomed generations now close behind men and women carrying their last pay packets, faces drawn with uncertainty. For decades, the factory's pulse set the rhythm of Birmingham life, shift changes, laughter in the canteen, the proud rumble of new cars rolling out to the world. Now, the production line has stopped for good. Half-finished shells gather dust where skilled hands once shaped them into something dependable. Outside, families gather, some in disbelief, others quietly grieving what's been lost. This isn't just the end of a business. It's the end of an era, of promises made and broken, of hopes for revival that faded with every passing year. The silence at Longbridge is more than a pause. It's the closing of a century-long chapter in British industry. Rover's story begins far from the factory floor at Longbridge, in the workshops of Coventry during the late Victorian era. John Kemp Starley, nephew of a bicycle pioneer, set out to solve the problem of unstable high-wheelers. In 1885, his Rover safety bicycle introduced a diamond-shaped frame and equal-sized wheels, quickly becoming the blueprint for the modern bicycle. This single invention carried the Rover name across Britain and beyond, earning a reputation for reliability and sound engineering. By the early 1900s, the company expanded into motorcycles, where the same values of practicality and dependability held sway. These early machines were never flashy, but they worked, mile after mile, year after year. Before Rover ever built a car, the name meant something solid and trustworthy. In a world chasing novelty, Rover quietly built its legacy on competence and care, laying foundations that would shape its future in British motoring. In the years after the war, Rover stood at the height of its powers. The Wilkes brothers, Maurice, the chief engineer, and Spencer, the managing director, pushed the company to aim higher than mere survival. Their vision brought the 1948 Land Rover, a vehicle intended as a temporary fix for hard times. Built with aluminum panels and a simple, boxy shape, it was rugged, reliable, and soon found itself exported across continents. What began as a stopgap became a symbol, a British answer to the world's need for something honest and tough. By 1958, Rover's confidence took a different form. The P5 saloon, known as the doctor's car, glided through city streets and country lanes with a quiet dignity. Its broad seats, smooth, straight-six engine, and understated lines spoke of trust and respectability. It wasn't flashy, but it became the executive car of choice for those who valued discretion over display. Then, in 1963, the P6 arrived. Here was real ambition. A D-Dion rear suspension for sharp handling, a separate safety cell to protect passengers, and a design that felt years ahead of its time. Rover engineers didn't stop at petrol engines. They experimented with gas turbines, chasing the future with a mixture of hope and technical daring. These were years when Rover's name meant invention, restraint, and a quiet kind of pride. The loss of that spirit would echo for decades. In 1968, Rover was swept into the new British Leyland Motor Corporation, a government-backed merger that promised to unite the country's carmakers into a single industrial force. Austin, Morris, Triumph, Jaguar, and others joined under one roof. What looked like strength on paper quickly frayed in practice. Internal rivalries flared as management tried to force different marques to share platforms and parts. The result was badge engineering, cars built to look different, but sharing the same bones. A process that blurred Rover's identity, once so carefully earned. Longbridge, already a symbol of working-class pride, became a flashpoint for labor unrest. Strikes and stoppages in the early 1970s left production lines idle and morale battered. Investment dried up as the conglomerate's cash was spread thin and quality slipped. Reports of rust, electrical faults, and mismatched trim replaced the quiet confidence that once defined a Rover. By 1975, British Leyland was losing over £500 million a year. The government stepped in, nationalizing the company to stave off collapse, but the damage to Rover's reputation was done. The badge still carried weight, but the meaning behind it was fading, lost in the noise of corporate confusion and broken promises. By the early 1980s, hope returned in an unlikely form. Rover struck a partnership with Honda, a move that brought discipline, fresh technology, and a new sense of purpose. The results were immediate and visible. The Rover 200 and 400, built on Honda Civic and Concerto platforms, arrived with engines that started every morning and bodies that resisted the old curse of rust. The Rover 800, sharing its core with the Honda Legend, offered refinement that could stand beside German and Japanese rivals. For a few years, the showroom floor felt different, modern, competitive, even quietly confident. Quality surveys improved. Dealers spoke of fewer complaints and more repeat customers. It wasn't just about sharing parts. It was about learning how to build cars people could trust again. In that brief window, it seemed as though Rover might finally have found its way back. BMW arrived in 1994 with a vision and a check for £800 million, convinced that Rover could be reborn as Britain's answer to Mercedes or Audi. The deal ended the Honda partnership overnight, cutting off a vital source of technology and stability. BMW's board spoke of respect for Rover's heritage and promised to invest in new models and modern production. Yet, the reality on the ground was less hopeful. The Longbridge plant, once a symbol of British industrial might, was by then an aging maze of outdated machinery and crumbling infrastructure. Plans for sweeping modernization ran into the hard limits of cost and complexity. Inside the company, cultural differences grew sharper. German managers expected precise processes and quick results. British teams, shaped by years of uncertainty and shifting priorities, struggled to adapt. Memos from Munich called for discipline and efficiency, but decades of underinvestment could not be swept away with new slogans. Still, there were flashes of what might have been. The MGF, launched in 1995, was a genuine success, a lively roadster with real appeal. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that Rover could once again build cars that stirred pride. But one bright spot was not enough to balance years of losses and mounting frustration. The gap between ambition and reality grew wider with every passing quarter, and the sense of unease inside both companies deepened. Inside BMW, Rover became known as the English patient, a nickname that captured both the company's struggle and the growing sense of hopelessness in Munich boardrooms. By the end, BMW had poured nearly £2 billion into the operation, only to watch the losses mount. The Rover 75, intended as a proud new flagship, arrived just as confidence collapsed, its launch overshadowed by rumors of withdrawal and uncertainty. In 2000, BMW gave up. The group was split apart. Many stayed with BMW, destined for reinvention. Land Rover was sold to Ford, and what remained, the battered core of Rover and MG, was handed to the Phoenix Consortium for just £10. A century of engineering, pride, and labor reduced to a token transaction. It was less a rescue than a quiet dismantling, the final humiliation for a name that once stood for something solid and enduring. When the Phoenix Consortium stepped in for £10, the mood shifted from despair to a fragile hope. Here were British hands at the helm, promising to protect jobs and restore pride at Longbridge. But relief soon gave way to suspicion. Reports surfaced of the Phoenix Four, awarding themselves generous salaries and multi-million-pound pensions, even as the company's future hung by a thread. With no capital for new models, MG Rover limped along by updating old Hondas and reworking existing designs. The much-needed deal with Shanghai Automotive dragged on, raising expectations that never materialized. By April 2005, the money was gone. Around 6,000 workers learned in a single week that their jobs and a century of manufacturing had vanished. The collapse rippled through families and the city, leaving behind anger, disbelief, and a sense that something irreplaceable had been lost. Some fragments of the Rover story found new life, even as the original brand faded away. Land Rover, once a stopgap solution built for hard times, flourished under Tata ownership. With serious investment and a clear vision, it became a global symbol of British engineering, selling hundreds of thousands of vehicles each year. MG, meanwhile, was bought by SAIC in China. The badge returned to British showrooms, now attached to budget-friendly cars built far from Longbridge, familiar in name but changed in spirit. The Longbridge site itself has been reshaped, its old assembly halls replaced by new housing and retail parks. What's left is less a company than a memory, the result of decades of underinvestment, badge engineering, and a carousel of owners who diluted the meaning of Rover until there was little left to save. Rover's name is gone from the roads, but its story lingers in every British factory closed, every community reshaped by decisions made far away. The fate of Longbridge warns us. When identity is traded for quick fixes, legacy becomes a cautionary tale. What memories do you carry?